The year 2025 will be remembered as the moment the long-simmering shadow war between Israel and Iran finally erupted into a devastating direct conflict. For years, the core of this tension was singular and profound: Israel's existential fear of a nuclear-armed Iran. Israeli leaders, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, had long warned that they would never allow the Islamic Republic to acquire the ultimate weapon. They viewed Iran's sophisticated nuclear program not as a peaceful energy project, but as a direct threat to Israel's very survival. This fear was not unfounded, as Iranian leaders had frequently called for Israel's destruction, creating an atmosphere of deep and abiding mistrust. The situation reached a critical tipping point in early 2025. Intelligence reports reaching Jerusalem suggested that Iran was on the verge of a nuclear breakout, a point where it could produce enough fissile material for a bomb in a very short time. Diplomacy had faltered, and international agreements seemed powerless to halt Iran's progress. The window for a non-military solution was seen as slamming shut. For the Israeli government, the choice became stark and urgent: act now or face a future where their greatest adversary held the power of annihilation. The calculus of risk shifted dramatically, making a preemptive military strike seem not just possible but necessary for self-preservation. This sense of urgency was compounded by the complex geopolitical landscape. The world was distracted by other crises, and the international community appeared divided on how to handle Iran. This created a permissive environment for unilateral action. Israeli officials believed they could no longer rely on outside powers to neutralize the threat. The decision was made that Israel would have to take matters into its own hands, regardless of the international fallout. The stage was set for a dramatic and violent confrontation, one that would change the Middle East forever and draw in global powers. The underlying historical animosity between the two nations provided the foundation for this conflict. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran has positioned itself as a revolutionary force opposed to Israel and its Western allies. This ideological clash has been fought for decades through proxy forces across the region, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to Hamas in Gaza. These groups, armed and funded by Tehran, have engaged in a constant, low-level war with Israel. The nuclear issue, therefore, was not an isolated problem but the culmination of a long and bitter struggle for regional dominance and ideological supremacy. On the night of 13th June 2025, Israel launched a meticulously planned and audacious military operation codenamed Operation Rising Lion. In a televised address, Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that the Israeli military had struck at the head of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. This was not a limited raid, but a comprehensive assault designed to cripple Iran's nuclear capabilities for years to come. The operation was the result of years of intelligence gathering, cyber infiltration, and covert actions. Israeli agents had deeply penetrated Iran's security apparatus, allowing for unparalleled precision in their attack. The targets of Operation Rising Lion were widespread and strategically vital. Israeli warplanes employing advanced stealth technology struck Iran's primary uranium enrichment facility in Natanz. Social media images and reports from Iranian state television quickly confirmed that the site was engulfed in flames. Simultaneously, strikes targeted other key locations, including the Fordow fuel enrichment facility, the nuclear site at Isfahan, and elements of Iran's ballistic missile program. The assault went beyond infrastructure, also targeting key Iranian nuclear scientists and military commanders in an effort to decapitate the program's leadership. The attack's effectiveness was devastating. The Hudson Institute later described it as a strategic collapse for the Iranian regime. The strikes not only degraded Iran's physical infrastructure but also shattered the leadership's confidence in its own defenses. By bypassing Iran's early warning systems and neutralizing its military assets with such ease, Israel demonstrated a stunning technological and intelligence superiority. The combination of physical strikes and sophisticated cyber attacks left Iran's formidable security state reeling, exposing its vulnerabilities to the world and its own people in a profoundly humiliating way. For Israeli leaders, the operation was a monumental gamble. They acted on the belief that a decisive blow could reset the regional balance of power and eliminate the most pressing threat to their nation's security. The political motivation was clear: to demonstrate strength and resolve in the face of what they perceived as an imminent danger. Prime Minister Netanyahu framed the operation as a defensive necessity, a last resort to prevent a catastrophic future. However, This bold action would inevitably provoke a furious response, setting the stage for a much wider and more destructive war. Iran's response to Operation Rising Lion was swift and furious. The leadership in Tehran, stung by the humiliation and strategic damage, vowed to exact a heavy price. Abdolrahim Musavi, the chief of staff of the Iranian armed forces, declared that Israel's attack was an act of war. The rhetoric escalated quickly, with another commander, Zolfagari, delivering a direct threat to the West in English, stating, "Gambler Trump, you may start this war, but we will be the ones to finish it." This statement was a clear signal that Iran would not absorb the blow quietly and intended to retaliate not just against Israel, but potentially against its powerful allies as well. The retaliation began almost immediately. On the morning of Monday, 15th of June, sirens wailed across Israel as the Iranian army launched dozens of one-way drones and ballistic missiles. The targets were widespread, with impacts recorded in the southern city of Ashdod and the Lachish area, south of Jerusalem. The initial waves of attacks caused significant damage and resulted in casualties, with at least 25 people killed in Israel in the first days of the conflict. This direct, state-on-state missile exchange marked a terrifying new phase, moving beyond the traditional proxy warfare that had defined the conflict for decades. This escalation was driven by the Iranian regime's need to project strength and restore its credibility, both domestically and regionally. Failing to respond forcefully to such a direct attack would have been seen as a sign of profound weakness. For the leaders in Tehran, retaliation was not just a strategic choice, but a political necessity for their own survival. They needed to show their people and their allies in the region, like Hezbollah and Hamas, that Iran could and would stand up to its enemies, no matter the cost. The conflict also quickly expanded to the economic realm. Iran's parliament endorsed a move to close the Strait of Hormuz, a vital choke point for global oil supplies. While the final decision rested with the country's supreme leadership, the threat alone sent shockwaves through international energy markets. The prospect of a severe disruption to the world's oil supply raised the stakes for the entire global community. This move demonstrated Iran's willingness to use its strategic geographic position as a weapon, turning a regional conflict into a potential global economic crisis and ensuring the world could not ignore the unfolding war. The direct Iranian missile strikes on Israel inevitably drew the United States into the conflict. Citing the long-standing American commitment to Israel's security, President Donald Trump ordered U.S. forces to conduct their own strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. This decision represented an extraordinary gamble. Trump, who had often denounced long-running Middle East wars, chose to intervene directly, aiming to eliminate Iran's nuclear program once and for all. American bombers targeted the Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan facilities, causing what the International Atomic Energy Agency described as extensive damage. The American intervention transformed the conflict from a regional war into a direct confrontation between the United States and Iran. Tehran immediately declared that the U.S. had entered the war clearly and directly by violating its sovereignty. This move by President Trump was motivated by a desire to project American strength, support a key ally, and decisively end a nuclear threat that had troubled U.S. presidents for decades. However, it also locked the United States into an open-ended conflict, risking a protracted and costly engagement in a volatile region, the very outcome Trump had long claimed to oppose. The war also ignited proxy conflicts across the Middle East. Groups like Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, both backed by Iran, launched their own attacks on Israel, opening up multiple fronts. This regional dimension is crucial to understanding the war's complexity. The conflict was not simply between two nations, but was the violent culmination of decades of a shadow war fought through these allied militias. The involvement of these groups stretched Israeli defenses thin and deepened the humanitarian crisis, turning the entire region into a complex and interconnected battlefield. Ultimately, the Israel-Iran War of 2025 was not caused by a single event, but by a convergence of immediate triggers and deep-seated historical issues. The immediate cause was Israel's fear of Iran's nuclear ambitions and its decision to launch a preemptive strike. This was met with fierce Iranian retaliation, which in turn prompted American intervention. However, these actions were built upon a foundation of decades of historic enmity, failed diplomacy, and an intense struggle for power and influence in the Middle East. The war serves as a tragic lesson in how unresolved grievances and a lack of peaceful pathways can lead to catastrophic conflict.